organization. We're focused right around 70s, 80s when a lot of civic and business leaders, including yourself and your husband, came together to see what they could do to rebuild the city. So if we could just start with a little bit of an intro to our audience about a little background on Paul. We know he was born and raised here, but also your background, where you were born and raised.
Paul was born here. He was born on February 14th, and he was a twin. So as a result, the two of them, he and his sister, were in the newspaper for that. So Paul started out in the public eye, and then he was raised here. His mother contracted tuberculosis, so she was in a TB sanitarium, and he and his sister and father were living with Paul's grandparents on Highland Street.
I was just going to ask what part of Lowell.
Yeah, on Highland Street on the South Common, with a wonderful old home that he and I actually first lived in one of the apartments that later came to be when we were married. But anyway, so he was there until he was about 10, and then his father remarried and moved to the Highlands. So Paul is a product of Lowell. He went to Lowell High School proudly, and really only left when he went to college at Dartmouth. So yes, proudly born and raised here, and very much in his heart and soul.
For sure. And you yourself, now you were born in a military family, and we're going to try to weave these two great, interesting lives together. You talk about that a lot and the impact that had on your life.
It did. My father survived the bombing of Pearl Harbor and went on to serve throughout World War II. And was stationed in a town called Chico, California at the end of the war to decommission a small air base there. As a result, by then he'd married my mother, and as a result, that's where I was born. But did not spend a lot of years there. He re-entered the Air Force in 1951, was stationed in post-war Germany. So at the age of 5, I was living in Germany. From there, different places in the United States, and then I went to high school in Tokyo, Japan.
Oh my gosh.
Military schools,
Oh
Defense
my
Department
God.
schools, I should say.
Yeah.
But all over the world. And came to Massachusetts to go to college. I was determined. It was really the one place we'd never really lived, and I was determined to come east to go to college.
That's amazing.
And as a result of that decision, through a college classmate, one summer in Washington, D.C., I met Paul.
That's where you two met.
Yeah.
No surprise. So this great political career that you both had was launched right in Washington, D.C. And where did you meet?
Well, Paul was an intern for Brad Morse, who was a then Republican congressman from Lowell, proudly so. And I had a college classmate who was also an intern. I was doing something else, not quite as important, and had a basement apartment with some college friends. We had threw a party. My college classmate told Paul about it, because it was the kind of party you'll tell your friends and they'll come.
Right.
And I always say it's the only party Paul ever willingly went to in his life. But he came, and we met, and really took off from there pretty quickly.
Yeah. So we had a long and beautiful marriage and children. And so tell us, so you both decided to move and locate in the city of Lowell?
Well, really what happened was I had another year of college to go, and I was not one who felt it was important to get married right out of college. So I spent a year in New York City working in the Department of Welfare there. In the meantime, though, Paul had come back to Massachusetts, had decided to run for the Lowell City Council, and was out going door to door throughout the work week. He'd come home from work and go out door to door, and was successful in his first campaign. And so we were then married in 1969, December of 69, and soon after Paul was inaugurated. So it was fairly quickly, but it wasn't immediate. I just felt I needed a year of independence.
Sure.
So how old was he when he was campaigning for this first position?
He was young. He was young. So if it was 69, he was 28.
Yep.
28.
Okay.
So he'd spent a couple of years in the Peace Corps after college.
Right.
Then he'd gone to law school.
Okay.
And then he'd gone back into the Peace Corps to train new volunteers. And then after that came back to Massachusetts and decided to live in Lowell. I mean, he had a well-developed desire to run for office. That was something he really wanted to do. And, he felt Lowell was the place that made sense to come to. And I think also Brad Morris had sort of mentored him on this is a good step. This is where you need to begin.
Right.
This is a place you understand. And he worked very hard. He really worked very, very hard in order to be successful. And I would come up in my year in in New York, I'd come up every weekend and go door to door for him. Not with him, but I go door to door. And that's really how I started to get to know Lowell, sort of in the neighborhoods, going door to door, meeting people, talking about Paul. And there were others doing that. Yeah, he had other team of volunteers. We were all out there doing that. Yeah.
Right. So just for the record, so we have some of the other facts. When he was in the Peace Corps, what countries was he in?
2 years in Ethiopia.
Okay.
He was in the first group of Peace Corps volunteers that were sent to Ethiopia. Wow. He was inspired by the presidency of John Kennedy, and when they created the Peace Corps, he never really left Lowell other than to go to college and occasional trips to family members in New York City. So it just seemed he wanted that adventure, but also just the experience of living in another country, learning about it. So that he would do that from 62 to 64, and then he graduated from law school in 67.
And what law school did he go to?
Yale Law School.
Yeah. Okay. And then he went back to the Peace Corps to help.
And he spent a year training volunteers in this terrible place called the Virgin Islands.
Well, for someone who didn't travel a lot or get out a lot, to start off by going to Ethiopia, that is that would be quite the experience.
Yeah. Well, it was seminal for him.
Yeah,
it was seminal. I mean, it was a different Peace Corps then. He and they were assigned to a village. Woliso was the village. There were a group of Peace Corps volunteers similarly assigned there. And his task was to help create a school. And so he and the volunteers, they built a school. The school, I don't know that it's still there, but Paul was back at some point. Some element of it was still there. And then they housed students as well, because the students were coming from the countryside of Ethiopia. Right. And he loved it. Just immediately started talking Amharic to them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I did not know that about him, that he spent time and that was part of his experience. That's wonderful to know.
Yeah. No, it was so important to him. Yeah. And then our oldest daughter was inspired by that. She spent a couple of years in Madagascar in the Peace Corps. Yeah.
So now on to the next generation.
Right.
He and you certainly have inspired a lot of people, including your own family. But so looking at Lowell, and when he was part of the city council, and you mentioned his passion in running for politics, what was driving him? What did he see? Clearly he wanted to make a difference. That's what happened for him in the Peace Corps. What was his big interest in the city of Lowell while he was on the city council where he started?
Well, I think, probably like all of us, we make these decisions and we have these ambitions. We don't always understand at the outset what's driving us. I don't. But as he was seeking the presidency, he would talk so often about watching his family business had been a small tailoring shop and then it morphed into a dry cleaning business. And watching his small business struggle to survive despite all their hard effort, because it was in a city in decline. Mm-hmm. So the economics of the community made it harder and harder for these small businesses to thrive. And I think that's where it started. He would go to school. From high school, he would go to the dry cleaning shop every day after school and have to help, watch how hard his father struggled, see how hard it was to make a living. And it just took root in him. That he just felt that life should not be that hard if you're working that hard at trying to do the right thing, as his parents were.
And this would have been in the 1950s, early 60s?
1950s, early 60s. And I think that partly motivated his desire to get involved in the Lowell City Council. But also he was a very bright young man, born with a lot of innate ambition and intelligence, and he was an innate change maker. And I think he saw politics as you can't do that when you're sitting in a law firm somewhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So when he was first on city council, do you remember what some of the changes or issues were facing the city at that time?
Well, the thing that drove Paul was we had a system that really, we didn't have a strong mayor system. We had a planning form of government, as we still do today. And the idea behind that is you would have professional city managers manage the city,
Right.
and the political arm would be the city council. But what happened in general was that the choice for city manager was invariably political and had not historically appointed people that had a background,
Right.
a formal background in city government. So Paul's platform was it should have a professional city manager.
Wow. Okay.
And he worked hard to do that, to bring that about.
Right.
And that was really where he started.
Okay.
And then other issues would come forth that as they do. But
So-
that was his driving impetus.
Would Charles Zedek have been one of the people at that time, or maybe he's too early for that? Charles Zedek was a city planner that was brought in. That was one of the first people trained in city planning, but it was in the late 50s, maybe early 60s.
And that's sort of, I think, a different piece. That city planning really, I think, is more around like a city planning department. This
Right.
is a city manager. They
Right.
manage the finances, they
Right.
manage all the different
Right.
departments, and should have sort of a broad view of how
Right.
city government should function. It was patterned after, or sort of similar to what Cambridge has always done.
Right.
And in
Okay.
the end, they ended up bringing in the city manager that had been in Cambridge.
Oh wow.
They did.
Okay.
And who was that?
Now I'm having Jim Sullivan.
Yeah,
James
okay.
Sullivan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a real turning point.
It was
for
a
the
real
city of
turning
Lowell,
point.
when
Yeah.
the professional city managers.
Yeah.
Taking
Who
over.
steeped in all the, the nuances of city government.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you remember some of the changes that came out of that in the city? Because that would take us into the 60s and then the spirit of the 70s when he has moved on in his own political career, he's got a little bit more clout. So what were some of the changes in the city, or did you physically see some changes as you're
Not right
living
away. Not right away. I think it was more in the management of the city,
Hmm.
who was appointed to head various departments, the budget making process, all of that.
right?
And the other thing is, in the meantime, so Paul ran for re-election in 71,
Okay.
a race he almost lost. And the reason he almost lost it was because it's in your questions, was he had endorsed the idea of extending the connector.
Right.
And what that would have done is barreled right through
Right.
a much loved neighborhood.
Yeah,
And he
Central.
almost lost because of that. But he saw it as making it easier to bring
Right.
people into
Right.
downtown Lowell.
Right.
Today, he would never have voted for that.
Right.
And he would not because he would put him in political peril,
Right.
but because he would better appreciate what neighborhoods
Right.
are, and how
Right.
they are meaningful to
Right.
people. And you
Right.
can't just bulldoze
Right.
a neighborhood down
Right.
because you think it's, might make things better.
So maybe we could transition
Yes.
to his time in Congress. So he made his race for Congress. And I was saying to you earlier, my first political campaign was working for you and Paul when Paul was running for Congress. It was so inspiring. I was a college student here at UMass Lowell. Tell us about that decision to run for Congress and what that was like for him and for you.
I mean, I think Paul's long-term ambition when we met, when he was an intern, was to run for Congress. I mean, that's something he just saw as so worthwhile doing. But what happened was, so he had these two elections. In total, we had 6 elections in 9 years. So we had 2 races for the city council. And then there was a movement to reform county government. County government was highly corrupt. It was on the front page of the Boston Globe. Spotlight, they were, spotlight investigations. So there was a lot of miss in county government. And there was a movement to reform county government with the goal of abolishing it.
And there was a citizens group that came together to nominate a slate of candidates. And we are at the caucus. This is in 1972, or maybe it was 71 when the caucus, I think it's early 72. We were at the caucus where we've done all the organizing, everything we need to do so that he's won on the slate. There's going to be 2 candidates for county commissioner and a candidate for county treasurer. And word comes, literally, we're out in the hallway before we have the vote, that Brad Morse is retiring from Congress in order to go work at the UN. Nixon was appointing him as an emissary to the UN.
Oh my goodness.
And Paul had wanted to do this.
Yeah.
And he couldn't because he's about to be nominated for county commissioner.
Wow.
In the end, it was a good thing. It was a good thing. So
Why do you think it was good to wait?
the election brought out everybody from the district who ever had any thoughts of running for Congress.
Yeah.
And so it really was, the primary itself really was, there were just so many candidates, both primarily from Lowell and Lawrence. And, who knows, he was still so nascent at the job, so new in many ways, raising the job money for it, all would have been very challenging. So he went on to be nominated on the slate. The slate was successful.
Right.
He went to county government and did, or at least began the process of doing what he said he would do. And in the meantime, another Republican was elected to the seat.
Okay.
He defeated John Kerry, who had moved to Lowell to run for Congress.
Okay.
So John became the Democratic nominee in that huge field of candidates. And then in running against a man named Paul Cronin, who had been the chief legislative director, I think, to Brad Morse from Andover, who won. Mm-hmm. So then when Paul decided in 1974, this is the year of Watergate. Mm-hmm. This is the year of Watergate. It's the burning issue of our time.
Mm-hmm.
To run against as congressman in a seat that had been historically Republican.
Right.
Now Paul was running as a Democrat.
Yeah.
He was the only candidate willing to take that on because everybody else had kind of learned their lesson or exhausted themselves or whatever.
Interesting.
And so it was Paul against Paul Cronin. And because it was one-on-one, because the district was changing, because of Watergate, he was successful. Right. And he was the first Democrat in I don't know how many years to win. Yeah.
Wow, that must have been
so
so
it was
exciting.
a good thing. It was very exciting, but it was
It's quite a fight.
it was quite a fight. Yeah. With very few resources. Politics, in those days, campaigns were not what they are now. Right. Now you have a whole industry around it. Then you had to do your own polling. You had to make your own brochures. You had to, there weren't, you weren't spending a huge fortune on television ads. It was quite a different thing.
And what was your role too? How did you help with that first one?
What I did was, and what I did historically was, I sort of was the surrogate. I went out wherever Paul could not go and spoke on his behalf, as did his twin sister, Talia.
Oh, right.
So the two of us were sort of dispatched all over the district. But it wasn't glamorous. I mean, I'd be standing in front of the supermarket shaking hands or going to all of which I did when I was running for myself. But it was just that very hands-on. Small groups that go and talk about Paul.
Right.
We had just had our first child.
Yep.
So it would be race out, do a few things, race back. But do whatever you could to be helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like that's the continuation of that JFK grassroots type of campaigning where you really are connecting with the community and letting them know you and you get to know them. So
it's true. And especially if you're new to a district, people don't really, Paul is known, but his tenure as a county commissioner had helped him become more familiar to more of the communities in this district. The county was bigger than the district, but being the county commissioner, the reformed county commissioner, had given Paul an opportunity to present himself to many of the voters that he would need, whose support he would need. Right. And in many of the communities where they just didn't know much about Lowell and didn't know much about candidates who came out of Lowell, but they were open to Paul. And so he was able to, persuade them that he would serve them well as he did.
Right. Well, that actually leads to our next question then, because as he goes on to a career as a congressman, that is actually when then changes start to happen here in Lowell, that he is so instrumental in supporting and aiding, and part of that would be the national park and other types of funding. So can you say something about those years as a congressman when he's still got Lowell on his radar as a place that could benefit economically, as we were saying earlier, to say, how could the city be built up economically and become a thriving destination again? Anything about that part of his congressional years would be good to hear.
Well, I think in those early years, he understood that in terms of gaining the support of the city, that was sort of the front and center piece of legislation that he had to tackle and hopefully be successful with. And others can address how he did it, but he was very strategic in that he understood the national park doesn't go about blessing potential national parks because it's an economic boom to the community.
Right.
It has to resonate with their purpose. And in this instance, it was the first urban national park.
Right.
So he was really persuading them on a multitude of fronts, but primarily he was persuading them to see the potential of a park like this and the value of a park like this.
Right.
And it was no small feat to do. It really was not.
It's not. And can you say more about his persuasive skills that way? Like what were some of the arguments he made? Because that's radical for a national park. And we think of Yosemite and we think of Yellowstone, and all of a sudden they say Lowell, an urban national park. He really must have had persuasive skills.
Well, they commissioned a study, and actually Fred Faust can tell you more about that.
Mm-hmm.
But they commissioned a study that validated the historical importance of the city of Lowell. And then I think I myself never read it, but probably made the link between its historical importance and the architectural infrastructure that supported that history.
Right.
So that you could put the money into the buildings as opposed to protecting the architectural landscape as opposed to the natural landscape.
Right.
And that was critical, but the study itself, I think, truly validated that.
Right.
And then from there, I think there were political maneuverings that he had to make, and again, Fred Faust and others can give you a better sense of those things. Sure. But one of my pictures I love most is a picture of President Carter signing the legislation with Paul on one side and Ted Kennedy on the other side. And Ted Kennedy must have done his part as well.
Right.
As well.
Sure.
Yeah. And thankfully we had a Democratic president at the time as well.
Right.
So you can't ever overlook those things. But
do you remember much about Pat Mogan? Because obviously we won't be able to interview him, but he was a key player in developing the idea of the National Urban Park. Do you remember much about Pat? Or
I not so much, but he's truly the father of the national park. I mean, he's the one who understood the value of the history, and it wasn't about the buildings. And in his mind, it wasn't about the buildings. And but it was a seminal idea that Paul understood. And I think it was through Pat's thinking that Paul came to appreciate the history. Right. Because I do think for many growing up in the city, you just didn't pay attention to the buildings you were walking through on your way to school. You might just say, oh, they're old. They doesn't look like anybody's using them. And not necessarily a positive thing. So I think Pat really helped frame their importance for people like Paul and others who came along to help support that idea. And then, as I said, Congressman Brad Morris and Congressman Paul Cronin, who Paul defeated, also, they pursued the idea when they were in office as well. So it wasn't a fresh and new thing. By the time Paul got there, there was some history to it. And he but he understood he had to continue along the path and be successful.
Can you talk a little bit about, you've mentioned the mentors in Paul's life during that time. Obviously, he was just such a force in the city. I remember him working with Bill Hogan and encouraging Bill to get more involved in the community. And there were just so many players coming together at that time. And I know you feel there were some great mentors along the way for Paul. And in doing this project, part of our hope is to give this next generation a playbook and show them when business and civic leaders work together,
They really can make a difference and turn a city like Lowell into the beautiful place it is today. So
It takes a passion. It takes a passion and a drive and a love of place, I do think. And for Paul, he saw it, and it's interesting, this is the Donahue, what's the formal name? Institute of,
yes,
yeah, and the Donahue family was for Paul, very, just sort of inspired him to think about the city, validated, I think also validated Paul's passion for the place too, because he could see it in others, like Dick and Nancy or Dick's brother Joe. He could see it in them. And they, Dick had left serving in the Kennedy White House to come back to Lowell. So coming back home and making a difference was a good thing to do. We don't all have to leave in order to make a mark.
Right.
And I think they were very instrumental in sort of modeling that for Paul, if not outright encouraging it. So no, it's very, very valuable what we who are here, how we communicate our feelings about the place we are and what's possible.
great role models. They were great role models.
They were great role models, as Nancy is to this day. So yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And now they're you and that whole community again that we're hoping to capture the force of that building that community and people like Dick starting that and encouraging it and sometimes
and having high standards. I do think high standards are critical. I've said this about the ballpark, the arena, the national park, the university, the community college, MRT, whatever it is you do, you have to do it at high standards. If you do a cut rate job, you have a cut rate impact. It's the high standards are really important. And I think that the Donahues, among others, really modeled that. You're not going to settle for less just because you're in a place that has to work harder at it. And Paul, I think, very much embraced that.
Right. And then you also carried on that tradition, and we want to get to your career also. But before we jump there, of course, Paul did make a run for Senate, and you might want to talk about that for a minute. But of course, we're also very proud that he is the first and only Lowellian that I know of that made a very strong run for President of the United States. So you want to talk about a little bit about that because we want to make sure we have time to get to your career too.
Well, I think Paul, it's not unlike how Paul was inspired. It's not really quite motivated by the example of a small business working in a city in decline, how hard it is to overcome. And he saw that happening to the United States, and that if we couldn't unleash the economic power of the country, we were all consigned to, flailing away as hard as we might work. And so that's what motivated his desire to run for president. He developed these thoughts while he was serving in the Senate, but then, of course, he left and wrestled with his diagnosis of cancer, and then had a bone marrow transplant, so his health looked good, as though he could take this on. And he always said, even when he was running for president, that he was really motivated by an idea. It has to be motivated by something real, because it's one of the hardest things you'll ever undertake. And it can't just be about me, myself, and I. It really has to be about something bigger. And it really was the underpinning of that campaign, because he was seeking the seat after Mike Dukakis had, been given the nomination, had not done well. There's a lot of skepticism out there. And so it took a lot of guts on Paul's part to sort of venture out and make the case. But it was always motivated by this strongly held beliefs. And yes, he did it proudly. We all were proud to be part of it.
Well, and he had so much proof.
Yes.
His ideas about better positioning the city economically. I remember him speaking about that very eloquently. And the concrete examples that we still have in the city today, the ballpark, you mentioned the arena, the national park, all the beautiful canals, boat tours, how many visitors that come to the city every year to this day. So he saw the impact that you can have through government.
And I think he also understood that it's not about government alone. Government has to play a role. The federal government, the state government, the local government. But it's also about the private sector. It's about the nonprofit sector. It's about the educational sector. All these players have a role to play, and nothing can go very far without everybody sort of rowing. He would use that analogy of
Did he?
if we're all the boat rowing together. We could all be standing up with the row, hitting each other over the oar, hitting each other over the head, or we can row together. But that takes leadership,
Yeah.
and it really takes somebody getting in there and making the case for we'll get further faster if we can just get over
Right.
our own little bailiwicks. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Those are good modeling and mentoring examples, because I think sometimes people do see themselves as too solo or individual, and the fact that if people can work, if he's working with the Donahues, or just as a community, if they're working to improve something, you can move faster. So did he ever row? I'm just curious if he made that.
He never really rowed, but he canoed.
Okay.
It takes leadership, though.
Yeah.
I know the Lowell plan is something that's known in Lowell as a sort of public-private partnership. He and Joe Tully, who was the then city manager, they had to knock heads. So
Right.
it takes inspiration. Sometimes it just takes
Right.
sheer willpower, and other times it takes, playing it a little tough and rough in a nice way. So just to
Right.
force people into, but then once everybody's there, it also doesn't stay that way necessarily. You kind of always have to massage it to keep
Right.
it going. So
Right.
it's a complicated business.
You bring to mind, as you speak of rowing, another one of his great accomplishments, and many times when we drive down by the Merrimack River, it's just a very dilapidated area. It was no place where you would ever want to go, and it wasn't that safe. But Paul had the vision, again, to really beautify that area. And now with the boathouse there, again, every year we see beautiful crew competitions up and down the Merrimack River. It's just beautiful, and that's another part of the legacy that he has. So let's talk about you in Middlesex. And of course, Middlesex Community College has had a great impact on our community, and you played a strong role there in helping Middlesex build their relationship with the region. Can you
Well, the
talk
thing
a little
about a
bit
community
that?
college is their name is meaningful. They're of the community and for the
Right.
community. And so, and at the time, Carol Cowan was a remarkable president who, I think had a great passion for Lowell as well. And so I came in to sort of nurture her vision for how the community college could be more a part of the city or add value to the city in a multitude of ways, as in addition to educating. It's the community and the people of the community. So it was a great place to be. I came to understand community colleges much better while I was there. I was happy to be there and happy to do whatever we could do to make people sort of shed light on what a community college is all about.
For sure. And we're going to be talking with Carol and hopefully
good.
talking
Good.
about all of the decisions and all the activities that you were a part of and she was a part of in integrating the college into the city and greater Lowell community. And then right after that, you yourself decided to run for Congress when Marty Meehan stepped down, and love to hear your vision. And I have so many great memories of you running for Congress. And we're also proud to have a woman step back into that role after so many years.
25 years. 25 years.
Good. Tell us that story.
Well, I was in my office at Middlesex when I don't know how I learned it that Marty was coming here. But I don't know. It wasn't a phone call, but it must have maybe it's an email. It may be a Lowell Sun alert. I'm not really sure. And I understood from having lived with Paul what a great opportunity being a member of Congress in any elective office, but especially Congress, not the Senate, but Congress. What a great opportunity you have to make a difference. You have extraordinary power. You can, if you put it to great purpose, you can do something. And so I knew that about the job. I also knew that you don't have to know everything to run for Congress, because I had seen Paul grow in the office. I remembered he was assigned to the banking committee as a freshman, and he despaired because he is not where he wanted to be, and he knew nothing about banking. But he grew to really enjoy it, and it changed how he served because of it. I think that's where he began to really wrestle with the national debt and all of these things that really informed his campaigns down the road. And so I knew that as well. I knew that you're given an opportunity and you just have to commit to learning. And I personally also could not stand that it had been 25 years since we'd elected a woman to Congress, and we had sent very few. I couldn't stand it. So in the spur of the moment, I said, I'm running. I'm running.
Was that quick? You just,
I knew enough. I mean, I had been a part of so many campaigns. I'd never been the candidate, but I certainly knew the campaigning side of it all. So I was very comfortable with that. I had some wonderful people I could turn to for advice and help me put together a campaign. I tested out my willingness to raise money to see if I was willing to do it. I had some wonderful young people come to help me. Chris Moloney here was my finance director, and he was, I can't say raising money was fun, but we managed to have fun. So I tested that initially to see if I was willing, and I was. So I made a decision right then and there to run, because I knew, again, that first of all, we had to change the history of the state and start putting women into those offices, if not higher up. And I was confident that I could navigate and learn what I needed to learn in order to be successful. But it was a difficult undertaking. Paul's races were always come from behind. No one ever took him seriously until, he was nipping at their heels. Whereas in my case, I started out as the front runner because of the legacy of Paul, my own involvement in the city. And there were some other great candidates. So it was not a simple race at all, but I was glad to be successful. And I give Lowell credit. I always called this the revolutionary district because, first of all, the Industrial Revolution began here, but the American Revolution began in Concord, which was also in the district.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, so that's also in the district. The labor movement began in Lowell and Lawrence. The first serious, really, truly significant labor strike was in Lawrence.
That's true.
We had the first environmentalist in Henry David Thoreau, and we elected Edith Norris Rogers, and we elected her for 30 plus years, well before women were serving, and we elected and re-elected her. So this district has a great history of leading for change. And I give this district credit, and the city of Lowell credit for that. I do. Yeah.
But you really ran a hard campaign. You worked hard for it. You had a lot of great ideas. I remember visiting you. Talk about role models. I was beaming with pride to see you walking through the hall of Congress, and I'm running behind you. And this and that. It's like, what was the most exciting moment? Do you remember what your answer was to me?
No.
The first time I pushed the button and made my vote. And my vote counted.
It's
Do you
true.
remember that moment?
No, but you're wise to remind me, because the other thing I really remember is right after, wasn't my first trip to Washington to vote. That would have been the first thing, because we had to vote on something immediately.
Was coming probably back for the first time going, and we flew in, so as I looked out the plane, I looked up the mall, and I saw the Capitol, and I said, I'm going to work there. It was, ooh. Something.
And you talk about women, and you know, sometimes we think we're at a certain point in history where we've already made all the strides we need to, and the road is clear. And then I remember asking you, and you were so kind to meet with a group of alumni to talk about your role as a congresswoman. And, you know, you really did focus on things hadn't changed that much, and it's still really, women still had to work harder for what they wanted to get and how they could get positions in Congress. Do you remember that?
I do,
and that feeling.
The culture of
you would have thought it was would be more progressive by then, but it really wasn't.
Primarily what it was the culture. The culture was so male in that because we just hadn't been there. And I remember, I think the first time I had to go in onto the floor when they would call votes, and we'd all rush to the floor because you have a certain time period within which you have to cast your vote. And going in, and I felt like I was going from the playing field to the locker room.
Yeah.
Because it was so male, and the level of energy, this sort of physical slapping everybody on the back, and this, anyway, it's not bad, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, and you have to, as a woman, it's like, oh, this is not kind of how I normally operate.
Right.
So you really have to find your way. But I was also fortunate to serve with Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, that said a lot. That
Yes.
said an awful lot.
Yeah.
And the numbers
Yeah.
of women grew and have grown steadily.
right.
Invariably change comes. Women are, especially on the Democratic side, where we achieve leadership positions, rather routinely, depending on how
Yeah.
long we're there. That we're rising up in the ranks, and as we're there, we're changing the culture. We're
Right.
changing. I mean, there's some things we will never change, but we're changing the culture. So it takes time. It does. But there are ever more women, and there will be ever more women. Yeah.
Just as the congressman, just to tie in with what Paul was doing as a congressman and his connections back with Lowell, maybe some of the specific issues had changed with Lowell by the time you were a congresswoman, but can you comment on some of the issues you've dealt with in office that still reflected back on the city? Or any economic incentives or things like that?
Well, I do think one role of a member of Congress is really to support communities' visions for themselves.
Right.
If not lead them, at the very least support them. And so I think bringing federal resources wherever there was a need. I mean, one of the last things we did in working with Chancellor,
I don't know if he was a president by then of the system, but investing in many of the bridges over the canals in order to improve traffic flow and help the university, and or bringing federal funding to the university, being supportive of that. In the end, the entity applying for the funds has to carry the day in that you have to prove your case.
Right.
But in a competitive environment where lots of other parts of the country are out doing the same thing, you need to come in and be supportive and push for the things that will make a difference. So I think that's an invaluable role that members of Congress have to play.
It's resource driven largely, but those resources are usually catalysts for change. They're not the change itself, they're the catalyst for change. And it gives the community the resources it needs. We always fought hard for funding for the national park here. This national park always did better than many others.
I do remember
that. Always did better than many others around the country. And again, it was a testament to the leadership of our park personnel. It really was. As much, I could be helpful, but they made the case, and what they were doing stood out. So to the point where that funding was not that hard to bring through. So you're always happy to do that. One thing that changed tremendously from the time that Paul was in office and I was in office was the numbers of people we represent.
Wow, I didn't think of that. That's really
because the country has grown so much, and the members of Congress are fixed. So Paul represented about 450,000. I represented almost 800,000.
Wow, almost double.
So
Amazing.
you're not covering more communities. You're just covering more people.
Right.
And we lost a couple of members of Congress because the growth is taking place in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
We're still growing, but we're growing. There's faster growth in other parts of the country. But technology helped to communicate. Paul didn't have that. The only way you could be known is to get out there, although we did a lot with being available. But there were things that helped make up for it. But that's one real change that came about in the interim. Yeah. And the issues are different, but the sort of underlying philosophy that you come with doesn't change too much. It doesn't.
Well, you're a great champion for all of us in this community. we have benefited so much from your advocacy and the work that you did in Congress. You're always a great partner, and I think we probably just want to kind of start wrapping up and asking you, obviously with this project, again, we're trying to give a playbook to the next generation and let them see this is possible to work together and bring about a greater good. So if you were speaking to the next generation, what's the biggest lessons that you would like to share with them, or advice or thoughts about working for the greater good?
Well, the work is never done. The work is never done. So it's wonderful. Let's just talk about the ballpark and the arena, for example, which were really important. But the university has now absorbed the arena. All sorts of wonderful things are happening. The ballpark is looking for sort of someone else to take it under its wing. Those were really important initiatives that Paul valued highly and thought were key to the city. But if you put them in place, it doesn't mean that they're going to do their work now and forever.
Right.
So it takes follow-on commitment and leadership. Some of the most valuable work for me and the ways in which I really started connecting with the city were when we made the decision to move back and not seek another seat in the Senate. I became involved in things that are unique to the library. I was on the Arena Commission. I was on the board of the Merrimack Repertory Theater. I was doing all these, they're little pieces of the city.
Right.
And they were very meaningful to me. It's how I met wonderful people, felt really engaged in the community, felt like I was making a difference. I'm so glad I could go on and be a member of Congress, because there it's about a line in a bill, here, which is important.
Right.
It's important. I remember when Catherine Clark was trying to decide whether or not to run for Congress. She called and she said, "Is it really worth it?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you a story." I said, I was in a hearing on the Armed Services Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, about body armor. Because of our fights in Iraq and Afghanistan, our soldiers were getting hurt, and we were developing body armor to protect the bodies, but we had never developed body armor for women. So women were actually at a disadvantage because they would wear men's body armor that just was not tailored for female bodies, and to the point where if you were trying to shoot a gun and lift your arm, the shoulder piece came out too far and you couldn't raise your arm sufficiently. So you were actually at risk.
Right.
We put one line in that year's 1,000-page bill, and to develop services to task them with developing body armor. And a year later, I was trying on some models.
Wow.
So that you have extraordinary power,
Yeah.
but it's not quite as local. Whereas when you're involved in all these local efforts, you feel it, you see it, it's different. But it fuels your passion for being a part of the whole and making a difference. And one of the reasons I decided not to run again after having been there 11 years was I went in as a change agent. I wanted to see women in office. Paul went in as a change agent, but we were products of a different time.
Yeah.
And each time needs its own leaders. And I just felt like, I've done what I should do, and now we need people coming up with a different background who've been exposed to different things. Listening to young members of Congress talk about artificial intelligence.
Right.
I could sit there and read this stuff for hours on end. And
Yeah.
if I looked at a bill, I wouldn't know if it was really doing what it needed to do. Whereas people who've grown up in it,
Right.
they can do it, and they can do it well.
Exactly.
So there's always a time for
Right.
change and new leadership, and you develop your leadership in your backyard, and then you move it up to whatever level you want to take it. It'll be rewarding no matter how far you go with it. It will be very rewarding.
So get involved,
Get involved.
be
Yeah.
engaged,
Yeah.
and also look back and lift up the next generation.
Yes, that's the other thing that Paul would tell you. So his feeling for generational responsibility. What it is we are doing our best to create for the future, not just for the here and now, but for the future. And that's something we all need to think about and do think about.
Are you hopeful about the next generation?
Oh, I'm very hopeful. If I see it in my own kids, I'm very hopeful. And I see it in my grandchildren too. Yeah, starting how they're starting to think about the world. What I loved is at one point, my grandson at the time, he's now 10, my firstborn grandchild.
Yeah.
Two things. Once he saw me, the fun things you have to do as a member of Congress, out on the ball field throwing the first ball at Lasher Park, and he was agog. What is she doing out there? But then at some point he saw something that I was doing. He said, "I want to be a nana."
That's great.
As a congresswoman,
Sure.
he was thinking of the congresswoman nana.
Sure.
I want to be a nana.
I want to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate so much you taking the time. It's just, Marie, I don't know if you have any.
Yep, no, this is a great note to end on, I think.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
no,
Yeah, it's been
that's
nice.
wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I know that future generations to come now will be able to turn to this interview and learn so much from you and your husband, Paul, and why you did what you did, and look at the results in this beautiful city. So thank you.
Well, the one thing I should say too is, I think young people sometimes think it's all rocket science. It is not rocket science.
Mhm.
It's just doing
Great.
it. That's how you learn. You learn by doing.
Yeah.
Even rocket scientists had to do before they learned.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
So get started.
Get started. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Tsongas. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.